"Steady, now steady, you great fool, you'll break your own leg thrashing so," a woman's voice called, and Everard Kesteven, the 8th Duke of Braithwaite, looked up from the mire that had swallowed his horse to the hock to find a young woman already climbing down from her pony trap into the mud beside him, hitching up a perfectly good sprigged muslin gown, as though it were of no more account than a dishclout. He had not asked for help. He was not as a rule a man who received it. But his hunter had blundered into a bog at the edge of the Braithwaite home wood, plunging where the spring rains had turned the track to soup, and the beast was in a fair way to injuring itself. And Everard, who had come out alone and on impulse in his oldest coat, wanting an hour's solitude before the ordeal that awaited him at the great house, found that he was, for once, glad of another pair of hands. "He is frightened," the woman said, wading in without hesitation, the fine hem of her gown blackening at once. "You must not pull at his head, sir, it only makes him fight the more. Here, give me the bridle, and you set your shoulder to his flank, and we shall have him out between us. He has only got himself into a panic. Most trouble in this world," she added, with a briskness he found unaccountably charming, "is only panic when you come down to it." They worked together in the mud for the better part of a quarter-hour, she at the horse's head, murmuring to it in a low, steady, sensible voice, he heaving at its flank until his fine boots were ruined and his shirt clung to his back, and at last, with a great sucking heave, the animal lurched free onto solid ground and stood trembling and blowing but unhurt. The young woman laughed, a bright, breathless, entirely unself-conscious laugh, and pushed a muddy curl out of her eyes with a muddier hand, and Everard Kesteven, who had not laughed in company for longer than he could recall, found himself laughing too. "There," she said, surveying the wreck of her gown with cheerful resignation. "Ruined, quite ruined, but he is a great deal better off than his coat, and so are you, and that is what signifies. Are you hurt, sir?" "Not in the least," Everard said, "though I fear I have cost you a very pretty gown." "Oh, this old thing," she said, which was plainly untrue, for the gown had been her best, "it will wash, or it won't, and I shall make dusters of it, and either way a horse's leg is worth more than a length of muslin." She wiped her hand on the wet cloth and then, with a frankness that delighted him, held it out to him to shake, as though he were a farmer she had met on the road. "You are not from these parts, I think, or I should know you. I know everyone hereabout and everyone's horse besides. I am Marion Loveday. My father is the rector at Nether Braithwaite, just over the hill." Everard took the offered hand. It was small and cold and streaked with mud, and he held it a moment longer than was strictly necessary. Now the Duke of Braithwaite knew perfectly well who Marion Loveday was. He had never laid eyes on her before this moment, but he had spent the whole of the past fortnight in a black temper on her account, for Marion Loveday was the woman he was to marry. The match had been made years before, between his late father and the rector, a tidy arrangement of two old friends securing their families, a piece of a will and a promise that Everard had inherited along with his title, and had every intention of honoring and no intention whatever of enjoying. He had ridden out this morning precisely to escape the thought of her, this unknown parson's daughter he was bound to wed, whom he had imagined as some meek, plain, dutiful creature who would look upon him with awe and bore him within the week. He had been dreading their introduction, arranged for that very afternoon at the great house, with all the enthusiasm of a man awaiting a tooth-drawing. And here she was up to her knees in a bog, ruining her best gown for the sake of a stranger's horse, laughing, ordering him about, holding out her muddy hand as though rank and fortune were the last things in the world worth minding. She did not know him. That was the whole delicious truth of it. In his ruined old coat, mud to the eyebrows, she had taken him for some ordinary gentleman abroad on ordinary business, and had treated him accordingly, that is to say, with a warmth and directness and complete absence of calculation that no one, in the whole of Everard Kesteven's guarded life, had ever shown him. Everyone who knew him for a duke performed for him. This woman, who did not, was simply herself. He opened his mouth to tell her the truth, and then, with a small private thrill of mischief such as he had not felt since boyhood, he closed it again. Kesteven, he said, which was true, for it was his family name, though he did not add the rest of it. Everard Kesteven, I am visiting in the neighborhood. Well, Mr. Kesteven, said Marion, you are visiting very badly if you are to be found drowning your horse in the Braithwaite bog on your first morning. You had better come to the rectory and let my father lend you a dry coat, or you'll take a chill, and then what shall I tell your people? She was already leading the trembling hunter toward her trap, all brisk competence. Come, I'll not take no for an answer. My father will be glad of the company. He gets precious little of it that can talk of anything but the tithes and the weather. He went. He told himself it was only good manners, that a man could not well refuse a lady who had ruined her gown for his horse. In truth, he went because he could not bear to have the morning end, because for the first time in memory he was in the company of someone who did not want anything from him, who did not know there was anything to want, and the freedom of it was intoxicating. The rectory was small and shabby and warm. The rector, a mild and bookish man, lent Mr. Kesteven a dry coat several sizes too large and pressed tea and bread and honey upon him without the smallest ceremony, and Everard, who dined off gold plate and was waited upon by 12 servants, could not remember when he had been so comfortable. Marion, changed into a plain dry gown and looking, if anything, prettier for the loss of her finery, teased her father affectionately and argued with their guest about books and told him, when he asked, exactly what she thought of the great absent Duke of Braithwaite. They say he is very proud, she said, buttering bread, and very cold, and that he keeps to himself up at the great house and looks down his nose at all the world. I am to marry him, you know. It was all arranged years ago before I was old enough to have any say in it. My father and the old Duke settled it between them. She said it lightly, but Everard saw the shadow that crossed her face. I have never so much as met him. We are to be introduced this very afternoon. I confess I dread it. It is a hard thing, Mr. Kesteven, to be promised for life to a man you have never seen, who they say has no heart, and to know your whole future rests upon whether he can be brought to tolerate you. And if he cannot, Everard asked very quietly. Then I shall marry him anyway, Marion said, with a small, brave lift of her chin that put him forcibly in mind of the way she had waded into the bog. For my father's honor, and because a promise is a promise, and because a duke does not release a rector's daughter from a bargain merely because she should have liked to be loved. I shall do my duty, and I shall try to be a good wife to him, and I shall hope in time he grows fond of me, as one grows fond of a serviceable old chair. She smiled, but her eyes were suspiciously bright. It is foolish to wish for more. Girls in books wish to be loved. Rectors' daughters marry where they are told and count themselves fortunate to be dukes' wives at all. Everard set down his cup. His heart was beating rather hard. Miss Loveday, he said, I have a confession to make, and I am afraid you will think very ill of me for it. My name is indeed Everard Kesteven, but I did not tell you the whole of it this morning, and I have let you go on all afternoon in ignorance, because I found I could not bear to give it up. Kesteven is the family name of the Dukes of Braithwaite. I am he. I am the cold, proud man you dread, who keeps to the great house and looks down his nose at the world. He watched the color drain from her face and hurried on before his courage failed. I rode out this morning to escape the very meeting you dread, because I too had been promised for life to a stranger, and I too imagined the worst, and I too meant to do my duty and expect nothing of it. And then my horse blundered into a bog, and a young woman climbed down into the mud in her best gown to save it, and ordered me about, and shook my hand as though I were a farmer, and laughed, and I thought, in the whole of my guarded, performed-for, flattered-at existence, I have never once met a person who was simply, honestly kind to a stranger who could do nothing for them. And I did not want it to end, so I said nothing. It was very wrong of me, and I am heartily ashamed, and I beg you will forgive me. Marion stared at him. The rector in his corner had gone quite still over his book. You are the Duke, she said faintly, the Duke of Braithwaite, and I ordered you to set your shoulder to a horse's flank, and I called you a great fool. You called the horse a great fool, Everard corrected, with the ghost of a smile. You were considerably more civil to me than I deserved. Miss Loveday Marian, I came into that bog this morning dreading a meek and awestruck bride, and I have spent the afternoon discovering that the woman I am promised to is braver and warmer and more entirely herself than anyone I have known in my life. You said just now that you dread me, and that you hoped in time I might grow fond of you as one grows fond of an old chair. He rose, and crossed the little room and stood before her. I must tell you that I am already a very great deal fonder of you than that, and that it took me not a whole afternoon but the length of a quarter-hour in a bog. I do not wish to marry a serviceable wife who does her duty and hopes to be tolerated. I wish to marry the woman who ruined her best gown for a stranger's horse. If she can bring herself to have me knowing now exactly what I am, and how badly I have begun, I should count it the great good fortune of my life. For a long moment Marian Loveday did not speak. Then, characteristically, she laughed, the same bright, breathless, unguarded laugh that had undone him at the edge of the wood. "Well," she said, "this is a very great deal better than being introduced across a cold drawing-room this afternoon, and a great deal muddier." She wiped at her eyes, still laughing, though the laughter was close to tears. "You dreadful man, you let me tell you to your face that I dreaded you." "I did," Everard admitted. "I shall be paying for it, I expect, for the rest of our lives. I find I do not mind in the least." "You understand," she said, growing suddenly grave, "that I shall go on being exactly as I am. I shall not learn to simper and be awed by you. I shall order you about and argue with you about books and climb down into bogs whenever a horse wants saving, and ruin a great many gowns doing it, and I shall not once look upon you as though you were more than a man. If it is a proper meek duchess you want." "It is not," Everard said, "and never was, though I did not know it until this morning. Marry me, Marian, not because a promise is a promise, nor for your father's honor, nor to be a serviceable chair in a cold house. Marry me because a stranger's horse was stuck in the mud, and you did not ask whose it was before you climbed down to save it. That is the woman I want beside me. That is the only thing I have ever wanted and never known how to ask for." She gave him her hand, small, no longer cold, no longer muddy, and this time she did not shake it. This time she let him keep it. They were married that summer at Nether Braithwaite, in her father's small church rather than the great chapel of the estate, at Marian's own insistence, and the whole village came, and the great cold house learned at last what warmth was. She never did learn to simper. She ordered him about to the end of his days, and argued with him about books, and ruined a truly remarkable number of gowns in the service of one distressed animal or another, and looked upon the feared Duke of Braithwaite not as though he were more than a man, but as though he were exactly the man she loved, which, he came to understand, was the greatest honor anyone had ever done him. And on their wedding day, when a well-meaning relation remarked that it was a wonder such a match had ever come about between two strangers who had never met, Everard Kesteven took his wife's hand before them all. "We were not strangers," he said. "I knew her the moment she climbed down into the mud for a horse that was nothing to her. That is the whole of a person if you have the wit to see it. I very nearly did not. I shall be grateful all my life that a bog saved me from myself."